Hello and welcome to the first Moxie Books video of 2020. Happy New Year and all that, although it's now the 7th, so it's probably a bit too late to be wishing you Happy New Year, but I'm going to do it anyway. Today I am talking about readability. So if you're writing a book and you get your book printed and you hope people are going to buy it, next thing is to make sure that they want to read it, right? It needs to be, which means that it needs to be easy to read, because if the book isn't easy to read, nobody's going to bother reading it. It's really important that it's easy to read, really important. You don't want to make people work when they are reading your book. You want it to be a pleasurable experience. You don't want them to notice the words on the page. You want the message to go straight into their brains. And if that's going to happen, it needs to be extremely easy to read. So if you are printing, if you're putting your book on Kindle, then you don't have to worry too much about this, because the people who format your book for Kindle or the software that you use will make sure that that's readable anyway. And on the Kindle itself, you can swap fonts around and change the size of fonts and things like that. I'm talking specifically about printed books here, and for printed books, the main argument that I've heard is kind of like, oh, what font shall I use? What typeface shall I use? Should it be serif? Should it be sans serif? And if you are printing a book for the vast majority of people who have no reading difficulties or anything like that, your book wants to be printed in serif font. When I say serif font, I mean the letters are formed with little tails on them almost. I'm going to show you what I mean here. So you see this page here. You can see the letters have got little tails on them. So that they're not just very simple. They've got little flicks, little flourishes. I don't know if you can see that. If you pick up almost any book off your bookshelf, you'll find that that's the case. There have been studies conducted that type of typeface is much easier to read. It's what we expect. There's the various theories as to why it's easier to read. Some people say it's because the tails lead into the next letter, and it kind of, I think it's to do with word shapes myself, and I also think it's to do with familiarity. But if you are writing specifically for an audience who has dyslexia, the rules change a little bit. I would really recommend that you go to the British Dyslexia Association website and have a look, which is bdadyslexia.org.uk. Their advice is that if you're printing stuff out, sans serif fonts are easier to read for people with dyslexia, which I think is really interesting. And they think it's because it makes the letters less, the words less crowded, because there aren't those tails on the letters, because they're much simpler shapes. So that is my advice for if you're writing a book for just regular people who don't have dyslexia, who don't have any kind of learning disabilities, learning difficulties. Write your book in kind of standard serif font, something like Baskerville or Garamond or something like that, a standard font, and make sure that it's the size is easy to read as well. So you want probably 12 point. If you're writing for an older audience, or again, people with reading difficulties, you want to make that font size bigger. It's really difficult if the words are too small. It's really difficult to read at all. And going back to the beginning, you want your book to be easy to read. If nobody can read it, nobody's going to bother reading it. That's kind of obvious. Really good book for you to get and have a look at and study is this one, Type and Layout by Colin Wheeldon. This is great for, he wrote it for the advertising industry really, but as you're going to be wanting to advertise and market your book, this is going to be super useful. It's going to be useful for all areas of life. It's backed up by actual research. It's not just people's opinions on what looks good and what doesn't look good. It's about getting your stuff read and, more importantly, understood, because just because you can read something doesn't necessarily mean you understand it. And there's some really interesting research in this book about people's reading comprehension. So, how much did you understand of what you've just read? And that varies depending on the typeface and the layout and all sorts of things. So go grab yourself a copy of Type and Layout by Colin Wheeldon and study it. But if you're just looking for what to use in your book, what typefaces to use, serif font for your main body copy. Use a sans serif for headings and titles. That's fine. And also it makes a nice contrast. It kind of it makes it a little bit less boring to look at, but don't use a sans serif for the main body copy unless you're specifically writing for people with dyslexia or other reading difficulties. So that is my top tip for today. I will be back same time next week with another top tip about writing and independently publishing your business book. And in the meantime, if you want to get started writing your book now, there's a link below. You can buy a copy of my book. Go to moxiebooks.co.uk/buy the book. You can sign up for my daily emails at moxiebooks.co.uk, where I will share all kinds of hints and tips and advice about writing books with you. And I'm shortly going to be starting a 28-day writing challenge. So hop on my email list and keep an eye out for that. I'll be back same time next week. Bye.